Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt. Another afternoon edition,
Yes,
otherwise known as the Matt Lewis B game edition.
yes, which is still better than other A games. Thank you for accommodating me again, Bill. I spoke to a group of interns this morning from on Capitol Hill, and
A group
so
of what?
a group of congressional interns this morning.
Interns. Interesting.
Interns, yeah. So I
You are
talked to them.
shaping young minds.
That's right. Talked to them about career, how I got to where I am, and how they can avoid the same fate. So good times, and I do appreciate you accommodating me with this, different taping time. But I think it's probably good because we've had a little time to let the astonishing news of Tuesday night sink in.
You at the Daily Caller, I have to admit, there was the one late poll in this race was commissioned by the Daily Caller.
Right.
And it showed Cantor up, I think it was 52-39. And, my gut reaction was Daily Caller poll. They, even though Matt Lewis is there, they have no record of executing polls. This seems much closer than people were expecting. I think I, like everybody else in the business, discounted it. But obviously, you folks at Daily Caller had some inkling that there was something brewing here, more than others, it would seem.
Well, it's certainly better than Cantor's internal polling, which showed him up by like 32 points or something. This was a stunner for people. I mean, I had lunch Tuesday on Capitol Hill with some establishment folks, and in passing, I just mentioned, so Cantor's not going to have any problems tonight, right? They acted like they didn't even know there was an election. So, I'm not saying it was their responsibility or that they would have been like the top people, but if there was any sort of panic, they would have probably heard about it. And there really wasn't. And it's astonishing. Look, it happens where campaigns get caught flat-footed a week out. They see, oh my gosh, we didn't see this tsunami coming, and now we have a week and we probably can't. There's probably nothing we can do. But at least you have a week. In this instance, Cantor and his people had seemingly no idea, even on election day, that they were in any sort of trouble. It is unbelievable. And so clearly somebody dropped the ball. Cantor's known for being, say what you will about him, but he's known for being competent, for running a very good operation. And this somebody clearly dropped the ball. There seems to be some sort of malpractice. There was a suggestion that maybe there was some Operation Chaos that would have skewed the polling, that Democrats and independents might have turned out. Exit polling, from what I can tell, does not bear that out. It seems like this was just a blown opportunity or a blown campaign from somebody on Cantor's side, and I think they outspent Brat by 20 some times the amount of money that he spent. So it's astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
But I've been tweeting about this. You've been tweeting about this, and I've been making the case. I just put a longer piece about this up at the ourfuture.org site. That because a lot of the Insta analysis is this proves that immigration reform is toxic for Republicans, and this is going to make Boehner completely bury it. There's something that maybe he would do it in this June-July window after the primary season was wrapping up. And now he's going to back off because Brat was going hard on Cantor. Now, Cantor is someone who, was opposed to the Senate bill, called it amnesty, but he was floating a bill that I believe it would legalize undocumented veterans. Is that accurate?
Maybe. I know at some points he was championing the what was it called with the students, the Dream Act.
Right.
He certainly was a champion of that. I mean, I think there was a sense that he was just generally speaking pro-immigration reform, and that was bad enough. And then there was a sense where he sort of had to flip-flop on it, which made him look weak. And so it just ended up not working out for him. And I think whether it's fair or not, people like Laura Ingraham and Mickey Kaus here at the Daily Caller and at Blogging Heads pounded him for being for amnesty. So I actually think it does say something about that issue in terms of the toxicity within a Republican primary.
I mean, obviously there is an anti-immigration faction in the Republican Party. That's not news.
Which is very motivated and very angry, and those are two things that tend to lead people to actually turn out to vote on election day.
Sure, but we also have other examples that show that backlash can be managed and mitigated. On the same day yesterday, you have Lindsey Graham, who actually voted for the Senate bill that all these folks on the right call amnesty. And he's in South Carolina, for Pete's sake, not exactly a moderate state. But he had a strategy to deal with. I mean, he was fully aware he was breaking rank to some extent from the Tea Party base. In fact, this is a guy who literally went to the New York Times to call out the Tea Party by name. He's deliberately taking his risks with the base, but he mixed that by being highly antagonistic to Obama on foreign policy, and also taking care of business, with his home state, doing your basic politics 101, keeping touch with your constituents, tending to their needs, having a proper get out the vote operation, all the kind of politics 101 that Cantor was not doing. And also even less commented on is Susan Collins, granted in Maine, a more moderate state, but as you know, they have a very right-wing governor because he won a three-way race against two, center-left people. So
right.
there is a conservative faction in Maine, a faction that could show up in a primary. Collins won her primary by 98%. Some people said Graham had a easier time because he had 5 opponents. Well, Collins didn't. Collins had a 101, and she essentially got elected or renominated unanimously. So it's not, and we also have the Renee Elmer situation in North Carolina we talked about before, where she went on Ingram's show and called her ignorant on immigration and won her primary in North Carolina.
So, all those things are true, but number one, it doesn't matter if immigration reform really sunk Cantor. It matters that the perception is that it did. And therefore, it will serve as a disincentive. I mean, this issue was already scary if you're a Republican who's afraid of losing an election or angering your base. This is just one more example of why you need, because we saw what happened when Marco Rubio stepped out and tried to champion it. He got hammered down. We saw what happened to John McCain in 2007 when he tried. It almost ran him out of the presidential race in 2007 when he supported immigration reform. He was carrying his own luggage at the airport. We saw how Mitt Romney demagogued this issue, using it effectively to attack Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich to sort of destroy.
In the Romney case, it clearly undermined that strategy, undermined him in the general. I mean,
it did, and that's my concern. I completely agree, but these folks are worried about winning primaries and satisfying their base, and I think that the Cantor defeat, whether immigration reform was the reason or not, or a contributing factor, the message is, if you're a Republican, stay away from this. If you talk about immigrants, you're going to use a certain type of rhetoric from now on. You're not going to come out and talk about anything that could be in any way construed as amnesty, even moderate things like the DREAM Act, which frankly, or allowing people who want to join the military to work towards citizenship, which I think should be a no-brainer. Those things are now dangerous to engage in. The other thing too is, if you look at Lindsey Graham, 2 quick points. One, he had 5 opponents. So that is an asterisk there. We don't know if somebody.
But if he was below 50, he would have had been forced to a runoff and had to go 1-on-1, and he avoided that. He got 57%.
Yeah, fair point. Nobody down there ever caught fire, and who knows? Maybe they would have if there hadn't been such a crowded field. But who knows? Lindsey Graham did well. I also think there's sort of a theory I've been toying around with, and I don't know if it's right or not. But my sense is that if you have a really tough persona, that you can get away with being a little squishy on policy. So Chris Christie is tough. And so until the bridge thing, I think he got away with being a little bit moderate on policy. And Lindsey Graham, say what you will about him, but he didn't back down on immigration. I mean, he was tough in terms of, he may not have stylistically the most macho persona, but he is a tough SOB in terms of pushing the things he believes in, fighting terrorists, and he never backed down or wavered on the immigration reform thing. Cantor did the opposite. Cantor sort of tried to find this middle ground and he sort of he doesn't have the tough Christie stylistic persona. And then even with his policy, he tried to finesse it and flip-flop. And I think that those two things together are not appealing. So I think Graham gets some credit for consistency and for the standing up and having the courage of his convictions.
Well, that's why I feel like if I'm Boehner or any elected House Republican, I have no obligation to succumb to the 24-hour insta panic and succumb to the immediate perception. I grant you the perception is there, but you're professionals. You should be able to take a step back, look at the big picture, and say, number one, there's a model for how you do manage the backlash, Lindsey Graham in particular, as well as Elmers and Collins. Number two, I might be fearful of what could happen in a primary, but guess what? The primaries are pretty much over. You got past this gauntlet with only one major scalp taken, and plenty of evidence that there was some sort of basic political malpractice that goes beyond the immigration issue there. What happened with Romney when you didn't calibrate yourself properly for the general. And what the long-term demographic issue is with the party if they don't get right with the Latino community in the long run.
But we've got this problem, which is, number one, congressmen stand for election every 2 years. So it's not that long. Number two, they still have to hear from their constituents. They're going to hear from radio talk show hosts if they vote wrong. They're going to hear from their constituents when they run into them at the supermarket or at a town hall meeting. And the base is taking a very right-wing populist position on this, I'll call it, for lack of a better word. Restrictionist, one might say. But it sort of is a populist. I mean, I'm sort of more of like a Reagan, Rubio, cosmopolitan conservative on this issue, maybe a little more libertarian. They're more, I think, populist, protectionist, dare say, on this issue. And I just think you got to realize, like, if you're a congressman from Kansas, even if you sort of believe that, like, yeah, maybe 10 or 20 years from now it's going to be, mathematically impossible demographically for Republicans to win, we'll let someone else sort that out. Like, that doesn't really confront me. I need to keep my folks happy, So you've got this situation where if you look at the House of Representatives, their incentives, collectively, it may be to do A, but individually speaking, it's to do B.
So your take is, that this will definitely go away now. I feel like you never can know what's going on in Boehner's head. He has some ability to surprise.
I wouldn't support if they tried some sort of a Trojan horse thing. I wouldn't even support that. Like if Boehner tried, and I don't think he would dare do it, but if he tried like some sort of trickery or Trojan horse technique to pass something related to immigration reform and then bring that to conference and then change it up and I wouldn't support that because I think you have to win. First you win the argument, then you win the vote. I think you need to win this, this argument, and I think that it would not be healthy to pass even a good policy if it were done in that devious way.
I don't think you can Medicare doc fix it, where you just kind of show up and slam it through without a recorded vote. I don't think you could do that. But I just wonder we know he has an animus to Heritage Action, to Freedom Works, the folks he feels are forcing Republicans into a politically dangerous corner. He finds opportunities to throw elbows at them. Might he look at this situation? Well, look, here's Cantor. Here, this guy's not a squish. I mean, I take your point that he might have been not always articulating the courage of his convictions and seemed like a bit of a political operator. But come on, this guy is not a moderate. This is a pretty conservative congressman, he was considered the conservative preference for Speaker over Boehner because Boehner's the big squish, right? So if a guy like that can get tossed for a far right extremist, that's not a healthy dynamic for the party. Might Boehner say, look, this has to stop. We need to nip this in the bud now, and I'm not going to sit here and let this party get taken over by a bunch of nut jobs. Might this get his dander up and make him soldier ahead?
What's that, Bill?
Might Boehner take this the other direction and say, I can't just sit here and let this kind of uprising take root because it's dangerous for the party. I need to take it. I need to face it head on. We have plenty of examples of Boehner not being courageous. Plenty of examples of Boehner sitting back and just sort of let the caucus do its will and not wanting to stick his neck out. But we have other examples where the "Are you kidding me?" speech when he made fun of his own members for being wimps on immigration. Like he has that part of him too. So yeah. I just feel like I don't know how one would react to a shocking development like this because it's kind of uncharted territory. And I wouldn't assume that Boehner's just going to curl up into a little ball after this. He might want to come out swinging.
He might. I mean, look, nobody saw the Cantor loss coming, so surprises still happen, and so that should humble us to say we can't really divine what John Boehner may do. I would be very surprised if his reaction to this is to try. I think clearly Cantor's loss makes it even harder for the rank and file Republican congressman to support anything at all close to immigration reform. And so therefore, as I sort of implied, it would require some sort of breaking the Hastert rule, some sort of probably trickery to bring something to the floor. And I just don't see Boehner doing it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would be surprised. But then again, as I mentioned, I was surprised the Cantor loss. So.
Now, on a subject I know nothing about, what does this mean as far as the Republican leadership is concerned? Obviously, there's a lot of musical chairs going on, people hinting they're going to run for this office or that office. I don't really know all the intra-party dynamics there, but are you able to give a rundown saying, here's what it means if so-and-so goes for this seat, that kind of stuff? I
can give you a very brief one because this stuff's breaking right now. It'll be old news by the time people see this. So we probably shouldn't talk too much about it. But Robert Costa is on top of this one. This is his.
He's the Washington Post reporter, formerly National Review, but now on the Republican beat for the Washington Post.
And this sort of thing's his wheelhouse. And the AP, of course, is now reporting that Cantor is telling associates he will quit his leadership post this summer. There are meetings and. So here's something from Costa. Tim Hulskamp, Justin Amash, Mick Mulvaney, and many others just left a secret meeting with Jeb Hensarling, all buzzing about a majority leader bid of their Texas pal. So I think you might see conservatives line up behind Jeb Hensarling to become majority leader. There's other talk about McCarthy, of course.
Now Kevin McCarthy is currently the number 3 person in the House.
I think so. So that would be the logical progression.
He's considered a bit on the moderate side, right?
That's right. So
he's got a very heavy Latino district.
Yes. So you see that be a sort of a surrogate battle over immigration, the establishment guy versus the conservative guy. The other thing is there's speculation that this means Boehner stays put. It was pretty generally assumed that Boehner would essentially retire after his reelection in 2014. But now it seems that this may have changed that calculus, and it's possible that Boehner now stays on to preserve some sort of continuity if he can't sort of help pave the way for his successor.
Why would Boehner care? I mean, he never. The assumption was he didn't like Cantor. That Cantor was kind of, a bit of his enemy, and that Cantor might have been trying to undermine Boehner so he could claim the speakership. Why does Boehner care if Cantor's gone? He could hand it off to somebody else now if he wanted to quit.
Well, you're right. They're sort of frenemies. I feel like there certainly was rumbling that Cantor was sort of always angling for Boehner's job. But on the other hand, sources seem to be indicating that this is the fact. I'm looking at a tweet here from Mark Halperin. Cantor fall equals more gridlock, more demand for Boehner leadership, more Republican civil war. So there does seem to be a sense that that maybe it'll be the establishment, other members of Congress who now will sort of ask Boehner or try to get Boehner to stay on to preserve some sort of continuity. Who knows what's going to happen? This is such a shock, but that would be one potential surprising outcome of this if it means that Boehner ends up staying on, whereas he might have otherwise departed. So, this thing's so interesting too. The people who've hitched their wagon to Cantor over the years, the political operatives, who thought this was just going to be sort of a pro forma scrimmage match, like Rocky 1 kind of thing, where it's not really a fight, and the other guy shows up, thinking it's a damn fight, not a damn show, or whatever the line was from Rocky 1. And there's so many people's lives. I mean, a lot of times these people do land on their feet with lobbying gigs or whatnot. But it's interesting. It's a huge event that happened. People, I don't know that there's another example. I think it's the first time a majority leader since the term or the position was created in the around the turn of the 20th century has ever been ousted. And certainly in primaries, and we've seen examples where people like Foley or Daschle or different people have been ousted in general elections, but in primaries to have somebody this prominent and this high up in leadership is really quite something.
Well, in other Democratic political news this week, the Hillary Clinton book tour is on, and she got a little tripped up, it seems, in the initial rollout. Would you say? I think it was in the Diane Sawyer interview on ABC, where she talked about when they left the White House that she was dead broke, and needed to put their financial house in order. Which, on one hand, is true in that they were in a lot of legal debt, and so they had net negative worth at that moment. But as others have pointed out, they certainly had the capability to replenish very quickly. They weren't rattling a tin cup. They had plenty of ability to hit the lecture circuit and otherwise and sell popular books and otherwise make money. So is this an example of Hillary being a little rusty, maybe not being as adept? She wasn't an adept campaigner in 2008. Some would say. Does that make her pause of wanting to go back into the crucible for 2016, or is this just an example of how nitpicky everyone gets with Hillary and Clinton's in general, and that she is used to that? She's just gonna let it roll off her back.
Well, I mean, first, I hate this sort of thing. I honestly don't think it should have been that big of a deal what Hillary said. The only reason that I think it's legitimate to bring it up is that turnabout's fair play. I mean, binders full of women, or how many houses does John McCain have? I mean, the nitpicking, it's not relegated to the Clintons. This is quite a bipartisan thing, and I would even argue that this sort of petty nitpicking is used against Republicans all the time. So in that regard, at least they're being bipartisan about bringing it up. And I do think, Bill, that this does speak to the fact that Hillary, who, by the way, probably next to Eric Cantor, loses the most from from the election, because she was really dominating the conversation and all the media buzz until Cantor lost. I think this is indicative of somebody who's not used to really being asked tough questions and having to think on her feet. It's something that you can get rusty with. I've seen it myself, where if I haven't been doing TV for a while, it's a little bit dangerous the first time or two I go back. You're just not quite as sharp. And I think that Hillary gets a lot of publicity, but how often is she really under the gun in terms of being asked tough questions that in a not pre-taped way? Like this media tour is I do think that it does say something about the potential problem of her once the campaign begins in earnest. Yes.
So one person who's trying to take advantage of this is Brian Schweitzer. Schweitzer is the former governor of Montana. Currently, I believe, CEO of a mining company. I think it's Platinum Mining. And both he and Bernie Sanders, and a little bit of Jim Webb, I think the folks who have made some teasing comments that they might run the primary against Hillary Clinton. Elizabeth Warren, who everyone talks about, is the one who said flatly she's not going to do it. Also, Martin O'Malley, the governor of Maryland, I think he also talks about it. But Schweitzer and Sanders and to a lesser extent Webb have been trying to make a more pointed economic populist argument against Hillary, and I think Schweitzer of the three has been the most directly antagonistic towards Hillary. Sanders talks about sort of populism more writ large and talks more about having a debate as opposed to criticizing Hillary personally. But Schweitzer has done a number of interviews where he's been more confrontational, and he leapt at the chance to make hay with this episode, talking to the Washington Post and saying, does the guy that works in a steel mill begrudge somebody who can get $300,000 for 30 minutes when he's making $20 an hour, and when he adds up his mortgage and his car payments and his college education for his 3 kids and gets to the end of the month and calls himself flat broke too? I've been to Iowa, I've been to New Hampshire, and I've been to South Carolina. People there, they build things, they grow things, they fix things. I don't think folks in those states or 47 other states really understand this notion you can be paid without producing anything, and that's all a swipe of her replenishing her coffers through the lecture circuit and the like. And I wrote a piece before this for Real Clear Politics talking about Schweitzer's bizarre strategy for challenging Hillary Clinton, because not only was he criticizing her personally, but he was criticizing Obama as a corporatist. He's criticizing Obamacare as giving taxpayer money to private insurance companies, when Obama is still beloved amongst Democrats. You can talk about his low polling generally, but amongst Democrats, it's still 8 out of every 10 voters are approve of Obama. 8 out of every 10 voters approve of Obamacare. So he seems to be trying to appeal to a very narrow slice of the Democratic electorate, and going at Hillary for making speeches. I mean, I understand Republicans wanting to make hay with that sort of comment, but I would think even the average steel worker would say, I don't expect Hillary Clinton to work in the steel plant. She's a politician, and she's going to make her money by doing lectures and selling books. That's what politicians do. So I sense a little desperation on Schweitzer's part to find daylight here. And I would think if you're a liberal that wants a primary challenge to Hillary, I think someone like Sanders would make for a better debate on the issues, and Schweitzer, I think, is kind of grasping at straws. That's my take on the whole thing. But I don't know if you feel Schweitzer has more punch, more charisma than perhaps the other ones do.
Well, first, let me just back on the Eric Cantor watch thing. Jonathan Weissman at the New York Times tweets, Pete Sessions of Texas, running for majority leader, says his policy focus will be sealing the border, not good for immigration reform forces. So there's that. Back to Hillary. Look, I think a couple things. One, like whether or not Schweitzer's message is compelling. I think there's going to be somebody or a couple of people who run against Hillary, and it will help their careers. And you remember, like Bill Bradley running against Al Gore and the attention that he got, and you can certainly parlay that into more if you want. So I think that there is somebody. There's room for a couple of folks to run against Hillary on the Democratic side and to elevate their careers in the process, because what do they got to lose? Because the media needs stuff to write about, and because Hillary could stumble. You never know what might happen once a campaign begins. So I think there's every reason for a couple people to run against her. And there does seem to be a sense that you can hit her from the we were talking about the populist right earlier, the anti-immigration folks, anti-immigration reform folks. There's a populist left, of course, as well. And that's what Schweitzer is doing here. And I think Elizabeth Warren could potentially do that. I think Jim Webb could potentially hit her from that side. So now, does it resonate with voters? I think it's a tough sell. I think that it's easier to attack a rich Republican like Mitt Romney than it is a rich Democrat. FDR, RFK. There's a sense, but they want to help the poor. They want to help the struggling by policies that spread the wealth around. So Democrats tend to get away with being really rich and out of touch in a way that Republicans don't. So I don't know that it resonates, but why not? Why not try it? I think it's in his interest to try it.
Well, I mean, I certainly think if I was going to run a primary challenge against Hillary, I would, press her on, Bill Clinton's financial deregulation. I would press her on her past support for NAFTA. I think those issues, they do cut in a Democratic primary to some extent. Maybe not 50%, maybe not enough to win, but like that, there's an opening there to test. But once you get into the cheap shot category, how dare she get paid for speeches? I don't think that sells in a Democratic primary. I think, because there's definitely a long history of Democrats closing rank around the Clintons when the media is seemingly being unfair to them. And as was with Obama, I think there's a certain button that gets pushed where people say, "Come on, let's not buy into stupid media narratives here." And so I don't see a lot of opening for that kind of tack. The general issue, the general populist critique, that's worth pushing.
Yeah,
and it's very possible that Hillary is going to respond to that and calibrate. Bill Clinton started in 1992, kind of a center right feel, and then when Paul Tsongas, claimed that mantle for himself, he quickly shifted into calling what Tsongas was peddling cold blood economics and taking more of a populist line. So it's not like politicians are.
Yeah, no. Remember another example. John McCain ran as a reformer, and then the next thing you know, George Bush is a reformer with results. And so sometimes it's just borrowing the rhetoric of the other guy. Sometimes, Howard Dean, another classic example of somebody who sort of shifted the race. So I think that there are plenty of good reasons for running. By the way, Cantor Watch here. Robert Costa of Washington Post tweets that a member is doing an informal whip count for majority leader, says, quote, "McCarthy has this locked," unquote. Does not think Jeb Hensarling can mount a significant bid. Wonders if Jeb Hensarling will run. So this is breaking.
Trash talk for only a few hours into this race.
Breaking as we speak. It'll be old news when it airs, but that's okay. Good, interesting.
I'm sorry, what was the last point you were making?
About the vice presidential stuff. About
Yeah.
Basically, that I think your point is well taken. That even if these folks run and lose, running a candidacy, there are many things that you can achieve. I mean, one thing obviously is get your own cable news show or make a name for yourself, parlay it into something bigger and better. The other is you can introduce, for example, Steve Forbes ran and lost, but because he ran, the concept of a flat tax became part of the political lexicon. It became much more debated and much more possible, I think, because he introduced the idea. The other thing is building a network and fighting for the future, right? So Pat Robertson runs in 1988 and loses, but because of his campaign, he was able to start from the sort of grassroots network he built, the Christian Coalition, which ended up being very important in the 1994 Republican Revolution. So there are a lot of good reasons why somebody might want to run against Hillary, and I think we agree that an obvious way you hit her is from the populist left, that's a potential vulnerability. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but I think there is an audience for that, and I think, and I do think that the candidates like Schweitzer and Jim Webb and Elizabeth Warren, probably more so than Martin O'Malley or the other potential candidates, Cuomo, I think that they, Webb, Warren, and Schweitzer have the potential to sort of hit her from the populist left. So, it's not an absurd thing to do. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but maybe you start chipping away at her, and who knows how she reacts.
Well, I mean, to your point, why would someone do this if not to defeat Hillary? And I imagine most folks would go into this knowing that is a long shot. But I think a potential Sanders candidacy, and Sanders has been pretty transparent about this, he wants to see those issues about inequality, about public investment in jobs and infrastructure, about aggressive steps on climate, about money in politics. He wants to make sure those issues are front and center and become part of the 2016 political conversation. So they have, like Steve Forbes and the flat tax, they have some staying power beyond the primary. Schweitzer strikes me as someone who is looking for a talk show deal. I mean, he already has an MSNBC contributor contract. He's a character. He's quotable. He's the kind of guy who could get a radio show or TV show. That's applause. I mean, he's not in politics right now. Where Sanders is still currently in the Senate, and Sanders, of course, is much Sanders. I think he's 72. I mean, he's in the twilight of his political career. And so Schweitzer, I think, is my sense of it is that it's not as strong a candidacy as far as what would be useful for advancing these issues is concerned. I think Sanders is clearly in this about his beliefs. Another thing about Schweitzer that I've mentioned in my Real Clear Politics piece is that he has this thing about Woodrow Wilson. I've seen him twice now in calling Obama a corporatist. One interview in Slay said, Obama's a corporatist, just like, Woodrow Wilson, who was the last Democratic corporatist. And then in the more recent one in Time Magazine, he said, you can't be the candidate that shakes down the most money on Wall Street since Woodrow Wilson did. And that I realize most voters aren't going to care about the legacy of Woodrow Wilson, but it's a red flag for me in that it's kind of a crackpot theory that Woodrow Wilson was a tool of the corporations and the banks. And there are people that say he fought World War I because the corporations pushed him into it, and that just completely ignores the fact that he was resisting going in until he learned that Germany was conspiring with Mexico to give Mexico our territory if Mexico entered the war. That's what pushed him into it. And there's also this notion that he set up the Federal Reserve at the behest of the bankers when it was actually he was actually driven to do it by Brandeis, Louis Brandeis, who was very much anti-big bank. And he only made compromise with the bankers because otherwise it wouldn't get through Congress. And so they split the difference on a number of things, which FDR did as well when it came to the Federal Reserve. The whole giving the Federal Reserve expansive monetary policy authority was a compromise with banks, so they would get representation on the committee. No one calls FDR a corporatist, at least not among Democrats. Some of your colleagues might, but Democrats sure don't. And so for Schweitzer to embrace that critique just sort of says to me he's a crackpot. And if I'm someone who wants to have a principled debate with Hillary on these subjects, I don't want to hook my wagon to a crackpot.
Well, and you wrote a really good piece on this for Real Clear Politics, which I think this is reinforcing a message that you've been pushing, which is, a liberal, fascist, pro-corporatist, Wilsonian, not to sound like a crackpot, but no, it was a really good piece. Check it out. It's at Real Clear Politics. And you managed to combine Ghostbusters and Hillary Clinton and Woodrow Wilson and something else all in one chock.
And I didn't even get into the fact that Ghostbusters is inherently a libertarian movie, as you and
right.
I think Philip Klein had pointed out. The EPA is the villain of Ghostbusters.
And also they work in academia, but they're lazy or something. There were a few.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
A few arguments. Yeah.
It was the 80s. It was the era of Reagan.
Yes. And by the way, who would have thought that Bill Murray? I mean, going back then. And Bill Murray today is bigger than he was then, and it's amazing. And if you could have dinner with somebody or have your picture taken with somebody, I dare say Bill Murray's in the top 10 now. I mean, you got like Obama, you got the Pope, and I think then you got Bill Murray. I think he's up there.
Well, apparently he refuses to do Ghostbusters 3. I understand they want to do Ghostbusters 3. They might do it without him, but apparently he refuses to do it.
Well, they should have Wes Anderson produce Ghostbusters 3 and do it ironically, and then I think Bill Murray would sign on the dotted line. But it was a good piece, and you managed to combine a whole bunch of stuff in there. But I think the Schweitzer stuff is interesting, and I love the bringing in the history with Wilson. I mean, he is an icon of the left, and I think that for some reason liberals aren't as keen on defending him as they are, like FDR and others. But
every time I bring up Wilson and something, I get flack from folks on the left that have, I think, very two-dimensional notions of him. And what usually comes up is that he was a racist, because he segregated the federal workforce, which is true, but I think it does lack a lot of historical context, and if you read John Milton Cooper's biography on Wilson, he explains a lot of it, and he really was more he's more disinterested about race than sort of actively, ferociously racist. He let the Southern racists, have their way. Which, and FDR was no saint on these subjects either. He was a real squish on the lynching law that was proposed at the time, and didn't help it get it passed, and it got buried. The Democratic Party was struggling with these issues at the time. Yeah. And
it's important whenever looking at a historical figure. I think it's also important to judge them by the standards of their time, not ours. Right. And that's just another example. I mean, but
it doesn't make sense to negate what progressively did do based on that aspect of his record. But because Wilson doesn't have the same kind of iconic successes, League of Nations was a failure. People don't credit him so much with the income tax or antitrust law or the Federal Trade Commission. These seem smaller incremental steps, I think, in people's minds. So even though the fact he bargained with corporations just like FDR did, and just like Harry Truman did, and just like LBJ did, Wilson gets tagged with it more than others do. People don't know the full histories of all these people and judge them under the same standards, and so it's easy to kind of pick on Wilson the way Schweitzer is. But I would hope that my liberal brethren would know their history better and understand everybody warts and all, but also understand how we got from point A to point B. Wilson is kind of ground zero.
Yeah. And why go all the way back to Wilson when you have why go all the way back to Wilson when you have Bill Clinton and Barack Obama?
As far as corporate bargaining is concerned?
Yeah. I mean, look at
well, I think there are people that knock Obama because he had these deals and don't appreciate that these are very similar types of deals that his predecessors had. Clinton's a more complicated story in my mind because he didn't do that bargaining on healthcare. He tried to just beat the health insurance industry straight up and wasn't able to do it. Whereas he was more compliant on things like financial deregulation and I'm forgetting an obvious trade. So he's more of a mixed bag there. But there's some people that just completely, if you're a Clinton fan, you whitewash part of it. If you're an Obama fan, you maybe don't think about some of it. They're just looking at the whole picture and saying, okay, here's what they did that was good. Here's what they did that was bad. Here's what they did that was necessary. That has always been necessary in the course of making liberal advancements. Schweitzer clearly is not looking at it in the big picture sense. And I can't knock sort of being sort of generally ignorant, or having knowledge that is commonly had that is incorrect. But I feel like the Schweitzer comments seem to go deeper than that. I feel like he's reading something. I mean, most people don't walk around thinking about Woodrow Wilson taking Wall Street money.
You ever think of that?
I mean, is it Glenn Beck? Is it liberal fascism? What? I think it's an important question. Where do you get this from? How is it shaping your broader worldview? That's what's disturbing to me.
We shall keep an eye on this, but I do predict, and I think I'm not alone, that there will be contenders against Hillary. I think it's a smart move, even if you don't think you're going to win. And who knows, she could stumble. So, or not run at all.
As she has in the past. Anyone can always stumble. So it always makes sense to, throw your hat in the ring just in case that moment happens.
Right.
So
think of whoever the Democrat was.
Does that encourage folks to get in?
Think of whoever the Democrat was who's on the ballot now against Brett and not Eric Cantor.
Right.
I think somebody...
His name's Trammell, right?
Well, there was a question as to whether or not they were even fielding a Democrat, but I think that somebody got on the ballot, I think, and that person...
No,
well, that's how my congressman got it. That's how my congressman, from my old home district, Roscoe Bartlett, a man that no one even knows about, unless you read that piece about him living in West Virginia as a survivalist. But for a lot of the time that I lived in Maryland, my congressman was a guy named Roscoe Bartlett, and he was a Republican before they gerrymandered and took away the Western Maryland's district. And Roscoe Bartlett, the only reason he was ever a congressman was there was a good Reagan Democrat named Beverly Byron, who was very conservative Democrat in Maryland, believe it or not. And she voted with Reagan on almost everything. And somebody ran against her in a Democrat primary and beat her. And the Republican on the ballot happened to be this college professor / inventor / farmer named Roscoe Bartlett that no one ever heard of. And the guy who beat her in a Democratic primary was too liberal. And so Roscoe Bartlett, the Republican, ends up becoming a congressman for like 25 years or something, for a long time. And an accidental congressman. So, I mean, these things happen.
Gotta be in it to win it.
Yep, that's right.
So I wonder, will more people get in the primaries against Hillary thinking, okay, she clearly is not impermeable. She has her missteps. Let's get in this and see what happens.
Yeah, and as we mentioned with the sort of the whole premise of this, with her talking about being dead broke or whatever, she is susceptible to some gaffes. And even though I think it's much ado about nothing, that's basically what business we're in. Most of what we do is, I mean, the obsessions. There are big things like the VA scandal being one of them, but a lot of what gets attention and clicks and drives the media conversation is stupid things like Hillary saying dead broke. So.
And the question is, how do you navigate it? I mean, Obama has had his moments too, but he has generally navigated them and shown that he could triumph over them.
Yeah, he navigates them by the whole no drama thing, and like by sort of, I don't know. It's almost like boring people to death, boring people and shaming people out of talking about it. Whereas but the Clintons.
I think while he's doing that, his staff is working very, very aggressively with the press.
But the Clintons
the
Clintons seem to create controversy that they can't get rid of in the same way.
Yeah,
and maybe they sort of secretly enjoy it. That's a psychological theory. They enjoy the attention.
Well, maybe we'll see if Hillary has taken a cue from Obama. Can you keep the poker face? Let your staff deal with the pushback, and you stay focused where you want to go. I mean, Clinton building some of that, after the impeachment. So that model, I think they're aware of. But that's the question, when these things happen, how do you deal with it? Because they're going to happen at some point. No one is perfect.
Yep. Exactly, Bill Scher. Another award-winning episode. I think I brought it. I couldn't think of the Dream Act there for a minute or two, but otherwise, the afternoon thing did not stop me from delivering another high-quality show. How many years have we been doing this?
Maybe did you have your own secret now? Are you taking an extra cup of coffee? You got a 5-hour energy? What are you doing?
I'm between coffees. I'm just drinking water. So.
Keeping it natural, I respect that.
That's right,
I'm caffeine free myself.
Saying my prayers, eating my vitamins. What was the whole Hulk Hogan thing? Saying the prayers, eating the vitamins. I don't know. Anyway, I'm doing it. Whatever the Hawkster recommended kids do, that's my secret to success.
Well, we will talk again next week.
All right, man. Catch you later.
Take care.